Hi, everyone, and welcome to Practitioner Pathways for Fast Tracking Forest Management Projects in California. My name is James Perini. I'm the Deputy Director of Public Affairs at the Climate and Wildfire Institute. And we're going to get started right away, so we have lots of time to cover some material and then get to our audience questions and some panel questions for our great group here. So to start the day, we are going to turn it over to the Climate and Wildfire Institute's Executive Director, Marissa Christensen, for a quick introduction to our organization, CWI, some of the work that we do, and a welcome to you all.
Great. Thank you so much, James. And yes, welcome to all of you. I'm sure I've had the opportunity to meet some of you, and thanks for joining us here today this is, I think, our third or fourth webinar that we've hosted this year. And this one's a little bit different because it's really about trying to illuminate some of the processes that we hope will make your work a little bit more expedient. So that is the goal. As James mentioned, I am the Executive Director of the Climate and Wildfire Institute, otherwise known as CWI, and we are here to help accelerate solutions to the era's most pressing climate and wildfire challenges. And the way that we do this is by bridging field needs to research agendas and research outcomes to public policy. And we help to scale effective innovations in hopes of providing new efficiencies in fighting and mitigating wildfire. We function primarily as a consortium, and as such, our focus is on collaboration and innovation across sectors. And we're looking primarily in the Western United States to start. We think there's plenty of challenge here and a lot of focus here, such that we hope to be able to support new case studies, new ways of thinking going forward and for the rest of the country. We would not be at this stage that we are today without the support and partnership across public, private, tribal, and academic sectors, and that includes each of you. So thank you so much for your continued support and partnership, and of course, your attention here today. So these webinars that we're hosting, it's a big piece of what we do is to convene and just hold space for shared knowledge and learning. And this is one of the ways that we do that, one of the easier, lighter touch ways that we do that. And so we're hoping here today that you leave with some really valuable insights that are actually implementable in some way in your work. So before we jump straight in with our esteemed panelists, I want to pause here and just get a minute or take a minute to get a sense of who all is in this virtual room. So if you can go into the chat and submit your answers, or not the chat, to the poll that you're going to see pop up and submit your answers, just let us know who you are and where you're from. We'll give it a second here. All right. Very nice. Looks like we have a good turnout and some interesting folks in the room with us. So thanks for taking the time again to tell us a little bit about yourselves, for being here today. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to James to dive in with our panelists. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Marissa, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Again, my name is James Perini. I'm a forester, a former wildland firefighter, policy wonk, and your facilitator for today's conversation. So to get us started, I'm going to do a little bit of framing, and then we'll introduce our panelists, and then we'll get into a little background on the different fast tracking mechanisms. So in March 2025, Governor Gavin Newsom proclaimed a state of emergency to fast track critical forest management projects in California. The Emergency Proclamation features pathways to suspend environmental regulations for specific wildfire risk mitigation projects, such as beneficial fire, hazardous fuels reduction, and other efforts to reduce fire risk. In short, the state now offers a range of pathways to expedite permitting and environmental review, the suspension of the CEQA and Coastal Act, CalVTP's expedited review process, and other avenues that are now available to practitioners. The best pathway may vary depending on the type of activity, location, budget, timeline, and size, among other factors. For today's panel, we're joined by three leading experts in this space. Lisa Leanmaker, who's going to be joining us shortly. Hopefully she's having some technical difficulties. Lania Quinn-Davidson and Jenna Archer, whose insights inform your decisions around available fast tracking options and planning resources to advance your projects. Lisa Leanmaker serves as the Deputy Secretary for Forest and Wildfire Resilience, leading the agency's initiatives to improve the health of California's forests and landscapes while building resilience to wildfire. Lania Quinn-Davidson is the Fire Network Director for the University of California's Agricultural and Natural Resources, where she leads a statewide team working on various facets of fire resiliency, from wildland fire management and the built environment to workforce development, and community capacity. Last, Jenna Archer is an attorney at Shute Mahali and Weinberger LLP, a public interest law firm dedicated to representing tribes, nonprofit organizations, and public agencies based in San Francisco. We are so glad and privileged to have you joining this webinar and excited to get into it. We're also joined by my CWI colleagues, Helen Lahota and Sabrina Goodman, who will be supporting behind the scenes of the webinar. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin on that note. Helen will continue to share some relevant resources and links in the chat throughout this discussion, so please be on the lookout as those come through. We also encourage you to submit questions through the Q&A function on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll answer as many questions as we're able to in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the webinar. If we don't get to your questions today, please feel free to submit them to info@climateandwildfire.org, and we will work hard to get you a response. With that, let's dive right in. So Lisa, you got a chance, wonderful. So Lisa Leanmaker is here from CNRA, the state agency, and has been working hard on implementation of the State of Emergency Proclamation. So what a wonderful resource for us to hear directly from the state about some of the process for the governor's emergency proclamation. So we will be turning it over to Lisa for the next 6 slides or so to share a little bit about that emergency proclamation, some of its features. And Lisa, please feel free to just let me know as the slides move along.
Thank you. Thanks, James. Good to be here. Sorry for the technical difficulty at the beginning, but we're moving on. So appreciate the opportunity to be here. Obviously, this has been a huge effort from a lot of folks working on the state team to stand up this process. So I'll just kind of start with a little bit of that context. I mean, I think we all know that the January fires really supercharged the conversation around wildfire safety. Certainly, I know it led to a lot of conversations about what community protection and wildfire resilience look like, and the fact that it looks different in different regions of the state. I know I was in a lot of legislative hearings and just catching a lot of conversations where people were kind of having this aha moment that, oh, it turns out wildfire resilience in the Sierra Nevada is different from on the North Coast, from, you know, the chaparral environment in Southern California. So certainly lots of conversations around how, you know, how that resilience looks different and how best to kind of pull the levers of state government to make sure we're supporting the work getting done. And, you know, as part of that, it was, you know, added urgency around getting projects done more quickly and efficiently. So that led, you know, essentially to this March 1st State of Emergency Proclamation declared by the governor, aimed squarely at accelerating that kind of work to protect communities and reduce the risk of catastrophic fires. So, you know, kind of 3 main components here. You know, one, of course, streamlining those critical fuels reduction projects by authorizing the secretaries from Cal EPA and CNRA to be able to suspend certain statutory and regulatory requirements. Another component was the refinement and expansion of the California Vegetation Treatment Program, CalVTP. Sorry, misstated it. And then recommendations to increase the pace and scale of beneficial fire. I know we'll get into those in a bit too. But to focus, really first on the streamlining, as the slide shows, some of the key components here. Our state team moved pretty quickly to really focus first on this, what we call the statewide fuels reduction environmental protection plan. And essentially that laid out a whole suite of BMPs to ensure that the projects can get done quickly, but without adverse impacts on natural and cultural resources. So the BMPs really are about protecting key areas like tribal and cultural resources, sensitive biological resources, riparian, water quality, sediment and erosion control, and a lot of other things that our teams really were thoughtful about to try to get these into place, with the understanding that as folks are applying for or requesting this streamlining, they have a really solid set of BMPs to follow so we can get the work done. We also spent quite a bit of time, developing kind of the eligibility parameters around the projects, really going through the wording of the governor's proclamation and, getting input from folks who are practitioners in the field, but really trying to come up with what are the parameters for under which projects can qualify for the streamlining. And so, we identified from the proclamation itself that it has to have at least one of the following as a primary objective. That's kind of removal of hazardous or dead and dying trees, creation of strategic fuel breaks, community defensible space, safer ingress, egress, and or reducing ignitions, and then cultural burning or prescribed fire treatments, and maintenance of previous fuel breaks. So that's kind of what the frame was as we got started. We set up a whole online portal. I think this will be covered a little bit later to facilitate folks getting in and applying. I can say that to date, we have had actually 24 projects approved for streamlining, and there are literally dozens more in the pipeline that our team is reviewing right now. It's our commitment to process these within 30 days, because we really want to be reflecting the urgency of the state of emergency, the proclamation itself, right? So I will say of the 24 that are approved to date, they're all focused on these primary objectives, removing those dead and dying trees, creating fuel breaks, manual and mechanical, removal of ladder fuels, beneficial fire use. It's really been a gamut of projects so far. And I know later they'll show you some of the tools, how you can be monitoring kind of the progress. But they've been led so far by tribes, RCDs, natural resource managers, fire districts, utilities, private landowners. It's really been quite a diverse set of projects. Again, the whole idea is to get these projects moving faster without compromising the important environmental protections. So I think the way we're kind of viewing this, obviously we kickstarted this whole thing in the wake of the January fires, but it's really building on work the administration had been doing to prioritize and really accelerate this work. Thinking back to 2019 when the governor had been in office just maybe first or second day and was up near Colfax and declared a state of emergency at that time in the wake of fires to expedite projects. And that led to 33 priority projects identified and implemented by CalFire that in the end protected 200 vulnerable communities. So that was kind of an early foray into this work where the secretaries were able to suspend CEQA and other regulatory requirements to get it moving faster. So we were able to kind of draw from that experience, but broaden it out, knowing that we were going to be getting projects from non-state entities as well. So a lot of learning curve going into it. And then I would also note too, with this opportunity with the climate bond passed by voters last fall, we've had new funding becoming available for projects, and the governor and the legislature enacted legislation in the spring to essentially front load funding for several of our state entities for grants that relate to wildfire. So that early action funding totaled about $170 million, already starting to get deployed by our various conservancies. And the governor also issued an executive order to make it clear that those projects funded under the early action are eligible to apply for these suspensions. So we're already seeing folks utilizing that combination of that early action funding and then this pathway for streamlining, we think is going to result in a lot more projects getting on the ground. So I think that's kind of how I wanted to set it up, James, if that's okay, and turn it back over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa, for that. That was wonderful. So next, CWI gets a great opportunity here to just share with you a little bit about some of the resources that we've been exploring that are publicly available for you to use in considering your projects. So we'll give you some of our impressions on some of these resources, and then go from there into a few case studies and examples of approved projects. So first, we won't spend a huge amount of time on CalVTP, a process for sort of looking at expediting and expanding on larger scale projects, but just to sort of mention that as a component of the State of Emergency Proclamation, that there's a story map, resource library for those projects, a huge amount of publicly available resources that you can take a look at if you're pursuing a CalVTP route, as opposed to one of the other eligible suspension opportunities, or another way to get your work done on the ground. So with that, there are a number of great resources that we found and got a chance to explore. On the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force webpage, there is a fantastic FAQ page that includes many great resources. A lot of the links are actually shared in this webinar. What we found is that the who can I contact for help project planning and or EPP compliance menu option includes this really nice drop-down menu. So from there, you can see a list of useful contacts from some of those local agencies and specific names and folks to follow up with. That FAQ page also includes all of the eligibility criteria that Lisa went over quickly, details on how to submit a suspension request. Again, you'll get a lot of that in the links here, and many other details that are covered in this webinar and much more. In addition to that, we found the Wildfire Project Technical Assistance contact page, which will again be put into the chat, as a really, really interesting resource. This is an interactive map where you can log in, look at a map of the state of California, plunk in your home, click, and see a nice little drop-down menu that includes technical assistance folks in your area. This includes people from Extension and local agencies who are sort of good usual suspects for getting information locally in your area, and including how to contact them. So it's a wonderful resource that popped up really quickly after the State of Emergency Proclamation that we wanted you to be aware of. Lastly, the agencies have, in really short order since the Emergency Proclamation's announcement, put together this dashboard of approved projects that show the scope, scale, and really geographic diversity of some of the projects that are being approved right now. We're going to go over a few of them. So in total, again, there's been 24 projects that have been approved, spanning across the state, with many more, as Lisa mentioned, being considered. We'll hear a little bit more from Lisa in our Q&A about what that processes look like and what to expect as someone who's submitting a suspension request. But in the meantime, let's talk through some examples so we can learn more about what the types of projects look like that are being considered. This first project is a large-scale forest thinning project in Siskiyou County. It's about 20 miles south of Wairika, and it spans almost 3,000 acres, right? So that's about the high end of the suspension request threshold. This is where you're sort of thinking, if a suspension request or the CalVTP route, what are your sort of best options there? This project, however, includes mechanical and manual treatments with a commercial component designed to increase the vigor of stands and for carbon sequestration, fire resilience, and individual tree health. So really importantly here, a couple of features. Near that high limit for project suspension requests, but still approved and viable. At this upper limit, you may be trying to decide again between CalVTP as a route or a suspension. What we've found and what we've heard is that you can contact Fuels Reduction SOE at resources.ca.gov for some perspective on that. It's also interesting to kind of think about your different options as you're going through some of these different projects. Just a bit further south, but still in Siskiyou County, this time here in Weed, California, we have a multi-treatment landscape scale forest resilience project. And this one's really designed for continuity between existing treatments, and it's across multiple ownerships. This one has a really strong WUI component. It includes emergency ingress and egress, manual vegetation removal, mastication, pylon burning, among a bunch of other primarily brush and ladder fuel reduction activities. It also includes a reforestation component, planting some trees focused on restocking forests for health and resilience. What's really interesting to me about this project is this patchwork that you're seeing, right? So thinking about your project broadly within a community context as sort of building continuity into the broader community resilience landscape, this project is a really good example of kind of piecing things together that still meets the eligibility requirements for this suspension request. Third, let's just go much further down south. We have this 350-acre project in East Los Angeles County. This one aims to enhance the safety of nearby communities by creating a strategic fuel break in an area designated as a very high fire hazard severity zone. What's interesting about this one is a couple things. First, it's being led by the Los Angeles County Fire. So you have the fire department itself as the lead applicant. And in addition to that, they're doing prescribed fire as strategic fuel breaks here in an area that is more in that sort of WUI urban, suburban geography. So a smaller project, strategic fuel break, designing some prescribed beneficial fire applications and specifically for fuels applications. Really quite different than some of the other projects that we looked at, but again, meeting the eligibility criteria and being led by a county fire department. We found that really interesting. Next, we have this next project, which is reducing fire risk and enhancing public safety near Petrolia. This is in Humboldt County. This one's funded by a U.S. Forest Service Community Wildfire Defense Grants. So federal funding, implementing 450 acres of fuel production on privately owned land. So federal funding on that state or local responsibility area, still within that CEQA designation. So eligible for one of these requests. This one focuses on ridgelines and evacuation routes for strategic fuel breaks. Interesting to me on this is that there's a wide range of cooperating local, state, federal, and tribal partners involved with this one. It aligns with the CAL FIRE Unit Fire Plan, which is something that's encouraged under the State of Emergency Proclamation and the county's Community Wildfire Protection Plan. So aligning with these different fire plans that exist and sort of patching things together with a diverse group of partners, this we also found to be a really interesting project. And finally, we have this last example from the Sycuan Fire Department, which is the local fire department of the Sycuan Band of Kumeyaay Nation. This group is going to be working with a local contractor on a 241-acre project to remove hazardous fuels using goats. So this is one of those prescribed herbivory projects that's also defined in the EPP. The goal here is to protect reservation land from catastrophic fire through these strategic fuel reductions. I like to think a secondary objective is lunch for the goats. So just a nice sort of range of these projects. In doing this, I think what CWI found as a major takeaway is that the agency secretaries are approving a really wide range of projects within the parameters that are outlined in the EPP, right? So that's a really good first place to look to see those parameters around some of these types of activities. Again, prescribed herbivory, goats, fuels reductions, projects with a commercial component, beneficial fire. We've chatted with the task force staff about this, and we feel like the message is really clear. If you're unclear if your project might reasonably qualify or you need support navigating options, get in touch. You might be surprised what's possible, and at the very least, you'll find yourself hopefully more informed about the options. So that's sort of a nice little summary of projects. We're happy to get into a little bit more, answer some questions on them. But before that, we wanted to cover one last really interesting feature of the State of Emergency Proclamation. So the state of emergency proclamation lastly includes a directive for the state to consider ways to expand the use of beneficial fire. To implement this mandate, a small group, including beneficial fire practitioners from across the state, solicited recommendations on this. We actually have one of those people involved in that effort here with us today, and that's Lania Quinn Davidson, who's agreed to join us. So Lania, we're about to get into the Q&A. We'll ask you some questions there. But did you want to actually just join us now and give us a quick overview about what that process looked like?
Yeah, no problem. So at the same time that the emergency proclamation came out earlier this spring, there was a request by the governor for a development and delivery of a set of recommendations around increasing beneficial fire in California. So those of us who work in a space were pretty excited, and it was a really short turnaround. I think we had 60 days to pull together recommendations. And so a bunch of us kind of in the practitioner community rallied together, and we worked with Lisa. Lisa hosted a wonderful roundtable on April 4th in Sacramento that brought a lot of prescribed fire practitioners and cultural burners together, and people who work in the research and policy space, to really put our heads together. And I thought it was a pretty fruitful exercise. We had that roundtable, and then Sarah Clark and I actually hosted a Zoom meeting for all the leaders of the prescribed burn associations in California. And I have to say that I think was one of my favorite Zoom meetings ever, because we pushed people to be really concise and to just brainstorm and throw on the table their ideas for what could really help us increase the use of beneficial fire in California. So some of you, I'm looking at the list of people on this webinar, many of those folks were involved in those conversations in some way. And what we ended up coming up with was a pretty big list of things that we think should happen, could happen in California. And the practitioner community delivered those to CNRA and to CalEPA. And then they were able to kind of pick out the parts that they thought were really actionable and that were appropriate to hand off to the governor's team. So I know that things are still in progress and they're still working with that. I guess what I'm excited to have is that larger living document of recommendations that are going to continue to be useful to us as we work on policy, as we try to enact new legislation, as we think about funding priorities. I think the focus for CNRA and for CalEPA and for the governor's team is really to think about what's actionable at the executive level, like what kind of executive actions could happen now. And so they're really working on that. But there's also a bin of policy ideas that could be future legislation. And then there's also a bin of funding priorities that I think we'll keep pushing on as the beneficial fire community to see how we can, roll those kinds of things out over the next couple of years. And you'll see in the chat, they put the Good Fire 2 report. So the second iteration of the Good Fire report that really kind of came through in those recommendations. And we're looking closely at those to see how the state can enact a lot of what was in those reports. So it's kind of like more to come. And I know Lisa has some things to say about it too. There hasn't been anything final that's been released to the public, but it's still in progress. And the good news is that we do have that longer set of recommendations that we can just keep pulling from and keep adding to as we continue this work.
Thanks, Lania. Lisa, did you want to get in there? We'll get to that in our Q&A.
Yeah, I think when we get into the Q&A.
Awesome. Sounds good. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can see us all a little bit easier here. And we're going to get started with a quick Q&A. So first of all, thank you for humoring that conversation. The last thing that I'll remind is that we have some questions kind of lined up and queued up for our experts who have joined us today. However, we again have an option for you all to raise your hands and add questions into the Q&A. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen, again, you can go down to the Q&A box. It looks like we've had a couple questions come in so far. That is wonderful. We are looking forward to hearing from you. And we'll get to those towards the end of the conversation. Until then, let's go for a couple of questions here for our group. So I'm starting here with an easy one, of course. we'll sort of go big and then get more specific. This is for all of our panelists, but let's start with Jenna because we haven't been able to hear from Jenna here at SMW quite yet. So setting the stage for all our panelists, what tools, resources, or enabling conditions are needed for California's forestry and fire professionals to get work done at the scale necessary to address the wildfire crisis?
Thanks. Yeah, that's definitely a big question. And I think some things that are really front of mind is workforce capacity and development and funding. But that really does intersect with the challenges of environmental review and other environmental regulations, which can be really challenging to navigate. And those do take up, they can be expensive, it can take a long time, it takes a lot of staff resources and expertise to navigate those. So, I'm super happy to be here today as part of this conversation about, how do we engage practitioners, how do we engage policymakers to work on reforming those policies at the legislative level, at the regulatory level, working with the governor, working with agencies to see those changes. And zooming even further out, I think that one enabling condition that we really need to focus on is just kind of a broader shift in the way that we think about fire, the way that we consider fire on a cultural level when we're educating communities, and of course, how that plays out in our legal framework. So we really have a legal, statutory, regulatory framework that doesn't make proactive stewardship, doesn't make beneficial fire on the landscape. It doesn't consider that as a natural part of our ecosystems, a baseline condition that we see in healthy ecosystems. And so I hope that we continue to kind of shift the framework, the way we think about fire and the way we regulate fire to enable proactive stewardship. And I would be remiss not to say that I really hope, and I am glad to see that our tribal partners are really being pulled in as part of this conversation, and that we really see them as leaders and partners because our landscapes, have co-evolved with fire and with traditional stewardship practices. So happy that we're all having this policy conversation, and we've got a long way to go, but I think we're moving in the right direction there.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenna. I really like that sort of everyone on the bus approach to regulatory realignment. That really makes good sense. Look forward to hearing a little bit more about that too. Lisa, how do we solve the problem?
Yeah, if it were that easy. No, Jenna, super appreciate your points around that shift in the framework or the mindset of kind of like considering the role that fire has historically played in our landscapes, and trying to get back to that sort of right sizing ourselves with fire, I think is really part of the journey that we're on. When I think about talking with different policymakers, there's been, I think, a big evolution in the way people are thinking, and I really think that's due to such effective communication from the practitioner community, people like Lenya, people like yourself. Like I feel like that's been such a benefit to have conversations where I think Secretary Crowfoot now has really internalized a lot of the points that he has absorbed from different tours and different conversations, and that's just going to really help us move down the road as we think about these things. One other thing that I would flag though is I think some of the new tools that are becoming available in the technology space are going to be huge. I know CWI is doing a lot of thinking about this, others as well, like how can we utilize LiDAR, various satellite technologies, all these tools to better understand and characterize what's happening on the landscape, which I think then can help us prioritize where strategically work needs to happen. Of course, with regional prioritization involved, but like given that we don't have money, time, workforce to do every single acre that might need attention, I think these tools can help us, really understand, model, figure out where that work can be done on the landscape scale, but also at the community level too. So that's one thing that I'm excited about, seeing where we can go with that.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. One thing that I would just say is that you participating in this event is a real representation, I think, of how the state is thinking about this. You sort of entering into community and participating in an event that's specifically targeted for practitioners thinking about their options. So just want to say thank you for participating in this event. I think it's really telling of the state's approach. Lenya, let's turn to you as a practitioner and a beneficial fire enthusiast. I'd love to hear from you about how we address the wildfire crisis at scale in California.
Yeah, well, I love what Lisa and Jenna both said, and I guess I kind of want to lean in a little more to the points that Jenna brought up around stewardship and kind of the policy frameworks. You know, I actually just got back from being in Australia for 2 weeks, and I was there co-hosting one of our WTREX events, a Women in Fire Training Exchange event. And we were burning for quite a few days on some Queensland parkland, so up in the northeastern part of Australia. And I was so impressed with what I saw there. I mean, for one, we did one unit that was a 10,000 hectare unit, so about 25,000 acres over a course of 2 or 3 days. But it wasn't the size of the unit that was so impressive to me. It was really the thoughtfulness around the sequencing of burns, leveraging previous burn footprints to do future work. They have such an impressive way of visioning fire and thinking about it in a really long-term way about how it all fits together in space and time. And I guess I came away feeling like we really aren't there in California at that level of thinking, that a lot of the work that we do is kind of one-off projects that are isolated in space and time. And I guess what I think we need moving forward is a longer term view, a stewardship ethic around this work. It's not about a single project. It's not about the acres 1 year. You know, it's really about that long-term thinking. And how do we leverage wildfire footprints so that we can do more prescribed fire? How do we bring cultural burning into that? How is it at a decadal or generational scale? And we really need to see our funding and our regulatory relief line up with that scale of thinking. And so I think, you know, the suspension is going to be a really useful pilot project to kind of see what can be done. And what I'm hearing from the practitioner community, and we'll get more into that, is just that time scale that's so short. It's going to be hard to really gauge it, but you know, how can we use that as a jumping off point to really think long term, and to really think at that decadal and generational scale, because that's the scale that fire works on the landscape here in California. So I think we have some good examples around the world that we can lean into.
That is really super helpful. I'm glad to hear about this, the sort of temporal aspect that you're mentioning. And going to the Women's TREX event, when I started in this work 15 years ago or so, we would not have a panel of all women experts. And so I am honored to just sort of like raise that and mention that out loud. I think that's an incredible way that we've been making progress, bringing that to the forefront. So just to kind of say that out loud, I think it's seen but should be heard. So going forward, let's get a little bit more specific about the suspension request. So this is a question for Lisa. Can you share some lessons learned from projects that have already made a CEQA Coastal Act suspension request or been using CalVTP as a fast tracking option?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a lot of lessons learned as we've worked to stand up this program. I've been really impressed with the way our state team of reviewers and the applicants themselves are interacting with each other. I feel like the conversations are super constructive. And we have learned, as people have, you know, actually gone into our online submission portal, and we started to see some trends like, hey, maybe we haven't been very clear what we mean when we're asking for this. So we were able to like, okay, there's a pattern here, let's go fix that. And you know, I think that it's that adaptive management piece where, you know, you're literally flying said plane while you're building it, and you know, because we really needed to move quickly. But I think we've learned a lot about kind of the specificity of the instructions, and you know, we've updated our FAQ, and you know, just really trying to respond, and things that seemed clear to us weren't really translating. So that's, you know, part of that piece. I think internally too, among our state team, you know, it's been great because I think folks have really prioritized this process, and that willingness to engage with an applicant to understand how that can fit. And applicants have been, really responsive and, well, can I rework this? Maybe this piece of what I was going to do is not in scope. How do I focus on the piece that clearly is in scope? So, I think we've made some progress that way, with definitely more to come. And, one piece I would say too is, we're starting to see some submissions come in that we're like, oh, didn't really anticipate that someone was going to be thinking about a project like that. Okay, well, how do we make that work? So, given the variety of folks that are interested in doing these projects, where they're private landowners, where they're RCD, some have tons of experience, with these kinds of projects, others not so much. So, that has been like, we've had to kind of get into a mindset of like, expect the unexpected, and we'll work our way through it. Kind of that adaptive management piece.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's really interesting, I suppose. Not surprising that capacity varies across the state, and it's interesting to kind of think about how you build capacity in those sort of areas that are kind of growing the scale of ambition of their fast tracking or their fuels reduction work. Great. So this next question, back to Lenya. Lenya, what have you been hearing from beneficial fire practitioners in particular about how they're using the CEQA or Coastal Act suspension process? And in addition to that, what are other ways to get beneficial fire on the ground in a streamlined way if one of these suspension requests might not be the most sort of straightforward or fast pathway to get work done on the ground?
Yeah, so I put out a call to my friends in the prescribed fire and cultural burning world to get their input on this, because I admittedly am not an expert on CEQA, and I felt a little out of my realm of expertise to be on this webinar, but I got a lot of great input from the folks that I work with, and such a great brain trust around the state. I think one of the things that came up for me, actually in conversation with Forrest Schaefer a couple of weeks ago, was that I think folks have been a little surprised that there weren't more beneficial fire projects that had been submitted yet to the suspension, because there are only a handful so far. And so that was one of the things that I was curious about when I reached out to the prescribed fire community. And I think one important thing to keep in mind is that a lot of prescribed fire work that's going on in the state of California right now, especially in the community-based realm, is happening without funding. And it's actually kind of outside the realm of CEQA, because it's just people getting together and burning together, which is kind of the beauty of the Prescribed Burn Association model. It's actually part of the reason we brought the PBA model to California, was to provide a pathway that didn't require funding and could maybe, be a little outside the environmental compliance, that kind of work, that the work just come together with people and their passion and their skills and kind of leveraging resources locally. So I think that's one of the reasons why we haven't seen as many beneficial fire projects. I think another thing that came up for me in, what the feedback that people gave me was that the 2-year window of the suspension, it doesn't align super well with larger, more complex prescribed burn projects. Because as we know, if you're planning a prescribed fire, it can take a long time to plan, but it also can take a long time to find the right window of opportunity to implement. And so there's this kind of alignment issue. And I think a lot of practitioners are a little bit nervous about going through the suspension process, not knowing if they'll actually be able to implement within that 2-year window. So one of the things that one of the RCDs that I work with, they mentioned that they're really viewing the suspension as a great opportunity to do some of the prep work and really provide some of those control or holding features that could enable future prescribed fire. And so there's an example of a big fuel break project with some black lining that's going to happen on the Big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve, for example. And they're really thinking about that suspension as a way to frame that up and to enable future work. But then maybe the big, more complex prescribed burn projects would go through a more typical CEQA process. So that's one of the things that I was hearing. But yeah, a lot of feedback on the time frame and the kind of misalignment of the 2 years, also with a lot of grants that are 5 years. So, you know, if you have a 5-year grant window or grant period that you could do the work in, then it's hard to have the suspension just be 2 years. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out. But I really did like that idea of using the suspension as a way to prepare for larger projects. I think another piece that came out of some of the feedback I received was the idea that some of these projects that these NGOs or RCDs or, you know, tribal organizations are putting together have a lot of different restoration treatments all wrapped into the same project, and that not all of those restoration treatments are available, like the suspension is not necessarily available for all of those different treatments. So they're kind of weighing whether it makes sense to parse out their project and have different CEQA pathways for different pieces of the project, or if it makes sense to kind of reframe their project altogether so they can take advantage of the suspension, or to just not do the suspension and go through a more typical process. So I think those are some of the questions that are coming up, and we see some of those reflected, I think, in the Q&A box already today. So hopefully we can get some answers. Maybe Jenna's going to speak to that. But yeah, I think that what we will see is that some of the beneficial fire projects are going to come in the next couple months, and a lot of practitioners are just trying to figure this stuff out, and then they'll submit. So I heard that too, that a lot of these projects are forthcoming and will be submitted soon.
That's wonderful, Lenia. Like every fire and forestry practitioner I think I've ever met, troubleshooting, scrappy, making it work, and finding really good solutions. It's really fascinating. I also saw Lisa scribbling down some notes on some of that. I think that's wonderful that we're all sort of taking this opportunity to collect input and hear from one another. So thank you all.
James, could I mention one more thing just to that note about how much of this work is happening kind of under the radar, so to speak? I did want to share in the chat that there's a new dashboard that's out for community-based beneficial fire. And this was put together and led by the Watershed Research and Training Center and some folks from my team at UC-ANR. And it's really cool. So I encourage folks to check it out. It's kind of a parallel to the state dashboard for treatments. But what you can see there, if you click on the tabs on the lower left, you can see trainings that have been hosted by the community-based prescribed fire network around California, and then the actual projects and acres and fuel types and fire hazard severity zones. So that all kind of links up, and you know, we should think more about how to merge that with some of the larger efforts at the state too. But I wanted to take this opportunity to share that.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's wonderful. We'll take a look, and I hope everyone who's attending gets a chance to see that new material that's coming out. So I think we have time for one or so more questions, and then we'll go to the audience. This question is for, if I may be so bold, our resident policy wonk, Jenna Archer here. So for Jenna, from a policy and permitting perspective, what are some key considerations that you feel practitioners interested in a project should make before deciding on a fast tracking?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a starting place, we should be thinking about what pathways are available for a given project. So again, if you're doing a small burning project, there's no public funding, no public partners on private land. You don't have to worry about CEQA. We have the Emergency Proclamation as one kind of streamlining fast tracking option. We have the CalVTP. And you also should keep on your radar categorical exemptions to CEQA. So really having those pathways in mind and taking a look at the various characteristics of your project. So again, location. Are you in the state responsibility area? Are you in the treatable area under the CalVTP? That's going to help inform what's a good pathway for you. Are you in the coastal zone? If not, you're not going to have to worry about Coastal Act requirements. Are you doing cross-jurisdictional work? So are there federal lands in the mix? And that's, going to add another layer of looking at what federal requirements you might need to navigate. For example, NEPA review. So starting with those project characteristics, location, size, we've already been talking about. Are you going to meet that less than 3,000 acre limit for the emergency proclamation streamlining? If you're within that range, that might be an option for you. For larger, more complex projects, you're going to have to look at, whether CalVTP might be an option. Similarly, when you're looking at categorical exemptions from CEQA, so, take a look at those CEQA guidelines, regulations. Class 1 categorical exemptions or class 4 categorical exemptions might be available if you're doing a small project, a minor project. For example, if you're working with, maintaining an existing fuel break. So keep that size in mind, location in mind. And, we've already also been talking about timeline. What's the timeline need for your project? And I think in some ways, the greatest strength of the emergency proclamation is also its greatest weakness, which is it's fast, it's right now, you've got to be shovel ready. So, if your timeline is you want to start this year or you want to start, by October of next year, great, that's a good option for you. But, not only do you have to start that very soon, are you going to be able to complete that within 2 years of implementation? If not, you're going to need to look at other options. So again, look to the CalVTP as a potential option, which can be challenging because, like Lanya's already mentioned, we can't just be doing a one-time intervention and then leaving something. We need to go back and do maintenance treatment. So again, having that longer-term view, the emergency proclamation is fantastic in the short term, but is not going to be that longer term tool, unless, viewing it as a pilot and viewing it as an opportunity to inform where we're going next in streamlining. And I would also, you've got to keep in mind, like, who are your funders and who are your partners? Do you have state funding? You want to look at the grant conditions. So read through your grant conditions. There might be additional requirements. And again, working with federal partners can come with its own set of challenges that you're going to need to navigate. So that's maybe too much detail on the practical side. But from the policy side, I do think that, the practical and the policy are really interwoven. And again, I think it's so fantastic that we're having these conversations about bringing practitioners and policymakers together about, what are these barriers? How do we deal with them? And I think from a policy and political perspective, there can be a lot of fear about, well, if we touch these environmental regulations, if we make things faster, if we remove certain steps, we're going to be undercutting the purposes of these policies. And I really think that this is an opportunity for it to be the opposite. Like, what are the purposes of these policies? It's informed decision-making, ensuring we're not harming the environment, public input and transparency. So I do think that instead of viewing, modifying these policies or streamlining these policies as undercutting them and making them weaker, we can take it as an opportunity to make these policies stronger and help fulfill those purposes better.
Thank you, Jenna. That is super helpful. So we only have 5 minutes left, so I wanted to get to some of the questions here for the audience. So I think what I'm going to do here, since we only have a few minutes left, is to just read those questions out, and then what we can do is follow up on the back end if we don't have a quick answer for you all. So in a follow-up to this email, we'll try and address some of these, or excuse me, to this webinar, we'll try and address some of those. So one, why is CalFire not eligible to take advantage of the current exemptions? Maybe Lisa can speak to that.
They are eligible. They are actively submitting projects. They are eligible. State entities are. So we've already had projects approved by Fish and Wildlife, for example. I know State Parks has some in the hopper. So they are, yeah, we are definitely seeing them as eligible.
Wonderful. We'll do one more of these and then we'll make sure that the last one gets covered. Lisa, this one's probably going to be another one for you. And then since we're asking you questions, we'll see if you want to get a last word in before we close as well. The next question is, what are the reasons why projects have not been approved? And is there an opportunity for the proponent to provide clarification and or additional information?
Yeah, great question. There is a lot of back and forth that happens between our reviewers and the applicants. In some cases, maybe the map that was submitted didn't match with the description of the work they said they were going to do. That gets resolved by, kind of reaching back out to the applicant, asking for some clarifying information. My understanding is that that's going quite well, and that it's very much kind of an active communication that happens. And folks on the applicant side have been as I understand it, quite appreciative of that kind of interaction and, work to get the clarifying information, get it over to us, we get it back into the system. Boom, we have one that just got approved in 2 days within the person, submitting the additional kind of missing information. So definitely what our team is very committed to is that kind of interaction so we can move these through.
And since you're talking about this sort of direct commitment to the public and this, we're gonna wrap up in just a second. Is there anything, Lisa, that you wanted to say just about sort of the interaction between what the feedback is coming in and the sort of what you're looking forward to and requests that are coming through right now?
Well, I mean, I think we're just going to see more projects getting submitted as people have had a little time to digest it. I really appreciate, Lenya, that and Jenna, that you had conversations, very productive feedback with folks. Certainly we are open to continuing to receive that feedback, how we can improve our process on our end, make things more clear. But as I think both Lenya and Jenna mentioned, we are seeing this as a pilot of sorts, right? As we can monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of how this is all work, that can inform our next steps. And I really am making note of what folks have been saying about that 2-year window. I mean, I think when we set out with this, we needed to provide some kind of expectation that that work would be getting done within that 2 years, given that it's an emergency, right? So in keeping with that, but I totally hear what people are saying about the longer term piece. And I appreciate Lenya's comments earlier about, how people are starting to say, okay, maybe I can use the suspension piece now to do some of the preparatory work to be followed on by additional work that might be outside that 2-year window. But I'm thinking that we're going to be, how this goes is going to help inform how we can make that longer term work happen effectively too. So I am really appreciative of hearing the comments, and we'll look forward to further conversation as we let this pilot play out for a bit.
Awesome, thank you. So on that, I want to make sure everyone gets out on time. So Lisa, Lenya, Jenna, thank you all for sharing your time, your knowledge, and your on-the-ground experience with us today. Your insights, real-world examples, and guidance on policy and permitting were incredibly valuable to our audience. Your expertise in helping moving forward, and we're really grateful for your leadership in helping to inform and streamline the processes required to advance wildfire resilience across California. To our audience, thank you again for tuning into today's webinar. We hope this conversation provided informative updates, expert insights, and a practical overview of the fast tracking options now available to support your wildfire mitigation efforts. Links to the full recording and resources will be available on our website following this webinar. As we continue to build this programming, we'd love to hear your thoughts, feedback on today's session, as well as other topics you may be interested in. Please take a moment after the webinar to fill out a brief 1-minute survey. Promise it's 1 minute. Once this webinar concludes, and keep an eye out on our website, social media for future webinar dates to come. Thank you all again for attending. I see our executive director, Marissa, here off mute, and defer to her to give you all a fond farewell until next time.
Yeah, thanks, James. Just wanted to echo my thanks to the audience and to our wonderful speakers. Obviously, you are all so busy with exactly what you just covered for this audience. So we all, I know, appreciate you taking the time out to walk folks through this. So until next time, thanks again, and good luck out there.